This is Shelly at IAB. Just Shelly at IAB Tech Lab. Welcome everyone to the Open Measurement Software Development Kit Show and Tell webinar. Uh, Good morning to those joining on the West Coast here in the US. Good afternoon to those from the East Coast, and good evening to everyone joining from Europe. So this webinar, we're as a follow-up to our release last month, as most of you may be aware, we released the Open Measurement Software Development Kit last year, and today we are organizing this webinar to go over a little bit about the background of the Open Measurement Working Group. Then we'll walk you through what is Open Measurement Software Development Kit, or OM SDK. We'll walk you through onboarding. How do you get the software? How do you download it? And then we'll have detailed walkthrough of how do you integrate the OM SDK in iOS and Android environments. Then we'll have details on how do you execute campaigns once you have integrated the OM SDK. And then we'll talk about adoption, our timeline recommendations, guidance from MRC, and integration, validation, compliance. And then we have the details on the little bit about the roadmap, the future of OM SDK that is being planned. So before we get there, I just wanted to introduce a little bit about Tech Lab. Many of you may already know us, but some of you who may be new to Tech Lab, the IAB Tech Lab is a nonprofit R&D consortium. We produce and provide standards, software, and services, all focused on driving growth on effective and sustainable digital media system ecosystem globally. We are governed by some of the leading companies in the digital media ecosystem. And we partner with IAB US and its affiliates around the world, with Ad ID, with Coalition for Better Ads, DA, MRC, TAG, W3C, and more, to make a better digital advertising ecosystem. Some of the strategies that we are offering for now is we are focusing on a transparent, safe, and effective supply chain. We're focusing on measurement, where OM SDK today's webinar is very much part of that. And then we are also focusing on the experiences for the consumer to make a better advertising and marketing experience for consumers. And then we're focusing on mobile and TV channel enablement. And we do this by providing standards, specifications, protocols, and technical guidelines like the OpenRTB or MRAID or VAST specifications. And then we also work on providing software, which is tools and code to support these standards, OM SDK being one of them. We also have a lot of validation tools for VAST and other protocols. And then we offer services like compliance to ensure that you have implemented the standard or the protocol or the software tools in accordance with the expected design. And then it can interoperate between your supply chain partners. A little bit about the Open Measurement Working Group. We started this working group about year and a half back, and then since then we have 45 members in the working group companies. We have 6 commit group members, who are responsible for governance of the working group as well as managing sustainable development for the Open Measurement SDK. The 6 commit group members are Pandora, Google, Integral Ad Sciences, Moat, Double Verify, and Comscore. Since we released this last month, we've got a pretty good, very good uptake. We have received more than 50 plus download requests from various partners across the world. And then we already have 3 or 4 partners who have already integrated and are in market. And you may have heard the announcements recently of Google's availability of the SDK in their IMA and GMA SDKs, as well as Flipboard has already completed their compliance, and so has Tapjoy and some others who are working through the integration right now. That was a quick update on the group and the activities so far since the release. Today we're going to be walking through the overall details about the SDK, what it is, how it works, how to make campaigns work, and the future. And we have a lineup of speakers from the team that has actually worked hard over the last 1 year to do the development and make this possible. So today you'll be hearing from Joe. He's a director of product at IAS, or Integral Ad Sciences. Alex is a senior software engineer at Pandora, would be walking us through the integrations. We have Brad Galliett from Google. We have Ron Pennelly from MRC, who will walk us through the accreditation process with the OM SDK. We have Sar Mamuni from DoubleVerify, Kevin from ComScore, Michael Bishop from Oracle Moat, and then we have Mayank Mishra, who's Senior Director of Engineering at IAB Tech Lab, who's been helping with the project throughout, and we have Meena on, who's our manager for events, who's helped put all of this together. Thank you, Meena. So let's get right into it. I'll hand it over to Joe and Kevin, who will walk us through what the OM SDK is and how it works. Joe, Kevin.
All right, sounds good. Thank you, Shailey. So the big issue that we've been trying to solve in the market is that there's been limited scale for mobile in-app measurement, particularly that's true third-party, completely independent. Coming back to 2016, it was about 2 years ago when we first kicked off at least trying to get this initiative started. The MRC guidelines weren't yet finalized for mobile in-app viewability. That took place, I believe, June 28th, 2016. Not long after that, we'd had a task force kicked off here and progressed pretty significantly from there. But the biggest thing was on the buy side. Advertisers were looking to have independent third-party verification, particularly with viewability measurement. And doing so required the integration of an SDK. And there were a handful of vendors that had SDKs in market, but suppliers didn't want to have to integrate multiple SDKs. There were challenges, obviously, in supporting all of that. In the event that you were an SSP, that you had an Ad SDK, even if it were integrated, you've got a period of time for adoptions, particularly 6 to 12 months before that update would penetrate across all of your publishers. So on to the next slide. So basically those things, why wasn't there scale? Well, there's a large undertaking for developing SDK in the first place. Integrating it provides black box challenges for publishers that are implementing it in the event that there's an issue. How do they go through troubleshooting it? In the event that you don't have an SDK, you end up having some limitations in terms of trust, accuracy, capabilities, and overall flexibility with the types of ads that can be measured. New SDK adoption takes time. Multiple vendors were competing for the same slots in supply-side roadmaps. And in the event that there were multiple SDKs, you're technically solving the same problem with similar code and implementing it in multiple instances. So you end up increasing the footprint of the app or of the SDK, overall risk, overhead, et cetera. Next slide. So this was actually, I guess, suggested by the MRC in their guidelines that the industry aligned on a single source standard that can be adopted by all parties, and they encouraged that, which was fantastic. So I think that there's a big thank you to the MRC and the industry at large for being supportive of an initiative like this, and I think that there's quite a bit of goodness that can come from it. Next slide. So basically what we ended up doing as an industry is growing the pie instead of fighting for slices. So instead of having multiple vendors try and compete with their own independent SDKs and over the period of probably 5, 6, 7 years for a single vendor to have complete scale across the industry, we decided to align together, form a single SDK that had the common denominator of all of the above, and enabled us to standardize on how data was collected, so that any given vendor's SDK or any given vendor's tag could collect the information necessary to calculate things like viewability in a single SDK. So equal access to vendors, similar to how it works for web. So if you think about a JavaScript tag on web, everybody has access to the same type of information. Anybody's tag can theoretically show up in an ad session and calculate and collect the information it needs for viewability. For mobile app, it's a little bit different. It's MRAID was historically a method that was developed for rich media ad serving, but had been used as a proxy for display ads in many mobile app environments. But there are obviously limitations there. This enables us to go much further in terms of ad types and in terms of, I guess, trust that can be put into an implementation. But this eliminates those black box challenges. We've seen higher measured rates, reduced native footprints, better memory utilization, overall protection of developer experience, meaning that the maintenance required is significantly lower given that you don't have multiple SDKs. And it also eliminates conflict or risk around potential M&A. So say that one vendor had an SDK that was integrated. What happens if they're acquired by another company? And now all of a sudden you have potential risks there. Next slide. Okay, and I'll hand this over to Kevin. Kevin?
Kevin, are you there? Kevin?
Shaley?
Yeah, I think you were muted. I just unmuted you.
Oh, thank you. All right, we're on slide 12, the publisher implementation. So thank you, Joe. There are two general ways that the IAB Open Measurement SDK is expected to be implemented within the app. First, there is the publisher implementation shown here, and the second is through the Ad Network SDK. So this slide shows a basic depiction for a typical ad with the IAB Open Measurement SDK implemented by the publisher within the app. In the publisher implementation scenario, when an ad is to be served into the app would notify the Open Measurement SDK that an ad session has started. The Open Measurement SDK creates a conduit called the Open Measurement Interface Definition API associated with the ad. The publisher ad server injects the measurement provider tag with the ad, and then the Open Measurement SDK communicates through the Open Measurement Interface Definition API to the measurement provider tag, providing ad offset and ad session events. The measurement provider tag then reports this information to their servers. Next slide, please. The ad network implementation. Looking at the Ad Network SDK workflows, this diagram shows the basic ad with the IAB Open Measurement SDK implemented as part of the Ads SDK, which is then implemented within the app. This might be recommended if an ad publisher may want the ad network, if an app publisher may want the ad network to manage the support of the IAB Open Measurement SDK. In the ad network implementation, when the ad is served into the app, the OM SDK is part of the Ads SDK. The Ads SDK notifies the Open Measurement SDK that an ad session has started. The OM SDK creates an Open Measurement Interface Definition API associated with the ad, and then the ad tag injects the measurement provider tag with the ad. The Open Measurement SDK communicates through the API to the measurement provider tag, including the ad offset as well as the ad session events. The measurement provider tag then reports to the measurement provider servers. Next slide, please. So the collection and surfacing, what is supported today? The collection and surfacing of impression and raw viewability information on display banners, as well as display interstitials on web view and native in-app ad units. As well, video advertising support is included as well. So for web view ads using HTML5 video or native video ads using in-app players. There's design and support for VAST 2.0, 3.0, 4.0, and the upcoming VAST 4.1 specification. So brand safety is one of the things that is facilitated through the SDK, but the logic to physically block an ad doesn't exist within the SDK. So measurement preventers will collect signals from the SDK, but the actual blocking or other brand safety functionality is not necessarily within the SDK and would be part of a measurement provider's tag. Fraud detection or invalid traffic is facilitated again, but logic does not exist within the SDK to determine a fraudulent ad. That would be done by the measurement provider. Advertising ID retrieval logic is not currently supported in this version of the SDK. As well, vPaid is not supported by the OM SDK today. Next slide, please. So we'll turn it over to Mank and Shelley.
Hey, thank you, Joe, and thank you, Kevin. I just wanted to, before we go to the onboarding, we'll have a Q&A session at the end. So please feel free to post your questions on the BlueJeans screen Q&A tab. We'll be collecting all of them, and then we will have questions for the speakers towards the end of the session. So next section is about onboarding. This is a quick walkthrough of how you can access the SDK and download the SDK. So there's a brief process that I just want to walk through quickly. That to get the SDK, you need to register on the Tech Lab registration page, which is the tools.iabtechlab.com. Then you would create your SDK build, and we'll walk through all of this in just a short while. You create your SDK build. If you need a specific namespace, you can create additional namespaces. The idea behind namespaces is to make sure that there is no conflict on the JavaScript if you have multiple Ads SDKs running in an app with their own OM SDK implementations. And that's one of the reasons that we are asking everybody to come to the the portal that we've created, register there, so that we can maintain unique namespaces for everyone. And then you can download the SDK. The build gets generated. You get a notification once your build is generated. Then, of course, is the step of the integration. Then next step is your internal testing of the integration. And then you can go to IAB Tech Lab for validation of integration, which is offered through our compliance services. It's a paid service. It's a voluntary paid service. What it does is that we make sure we run your integration through all of our test cases to ensure that it's going to work with all the measurement providers' verification tags. In addition, if you have time, it's a good idea to even contact some of the measurement providers and test with their actual tags. And then there is the OM SDK JavaScript that will be updated from time to time as we develop. And that process is like we're running on a sprint process, so we're releasing every 2 weeks. So some development additions, bug fixes that are happening every 2 weeks. We recommend that you get this OMID JavaScript file that at least once a week and more frequently if possible, to make sure that you always have the latest. I'll hand it over to Mayank now for the Tech Lab Tools portal. Mayank.
Hey, Shelley, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Hello, everyone. So we have done up a pre-recording session of our tools portal. Shelley, can you play it?
Yeah.
Thank you. So this is a landing page. You have the So this
Yeah.
is a landing page you will come across with the login button, and then you can register yourself. Please try to use the company email address because once we get the login info, we verify with the company details. You'll come across a dashboard where various other tools, but you will see at the top two the recordings and the OM SDK. This is once you get into the OM SDK, you will see the namespaces. You can create the namespace. The namespaces is the default, the company name. Plus, the every other build will have a number prefix to it, like 1, 2, 3, and you can build it by iOS or build Android. You can create, you can delete as many as you want. Once the build is successful, or if it's a failure, you will get the email notification to your registered email address. Once the build is success, you can go to various tabs, iOS, Android, and you can download the various versions, the latest ones, the documentations as well. The reference apps are coming soon. In case if you are seeing that, okay, as the build is successful and you are not able to see, please try to use the refresh button. Sometimes there is a delay because the way we use the whole workflow on the continuous build. There is a version upgrade which you will see every 2 weeks, if not. Otherwise, if it's a major release, we will do a public update on that. That's pretty much on the tools portal. Let me know if you have any questions in the Q&A. I'll more than happy to help.
Thank you, Meg. So the next section is once you've got your namespace, you've downloaded everything. The very next step is the actual integration of the SDK. We have Alex from Pandora to walk us through the integration. Alex.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Shailey. Okay, so for this demo, we prepared iOS and Android apps that showcase 3 different ad units, native display, HTML display, and native video. So let's start the playback. So this is an iOS app, and it's just an app that has 3 different placements, and let's take a look at what it can do. You see there is a banner in the scroll view. There is a native close button overlaying it. Native video, pretty much the same thing, but plays a video. And then there's a native display. All right, let's see what we can do to add OM SDK integration to each one of those placements. So let's pause here. Okay, before we start, let's take a look at how view controller lifecycle works here. So we have view did appear. Let's play. When the view loads on screen, the ad will be automatically requested, and the networking call will be made. And when it's completed, the did finish fetching creative callback will be fired. So this is what subclasses will need to override. And then there's a present ad method that subclasses will call when they're ready to display the ad. And we'll present the ad is called just before the ad is presented. So this is a good starting point for us to start ad session and do the measurements. And then did dismiss ad is when we can destroy the ad session and finish the measurements. All right, so we'll start by adding OM SDK to the project. Let's create the new OM SDK group. And remember that builds are namespaced. For this demo, we used Pandora namespace. So we'll add the framework to the project as well as the JavaScript Omid.js service script. The framework is added. Now just the OM SDK.js, which will load in runtime instead of loading it from a network. All right, and now we are ready to move forward with the actual integration. So we'll do most of the implementation in the base class, and then in the sub classes, we'll do things that are specific to each placement. So we'll start by adding a method start measurement. Now, the first thing we want to do is to actually activate the SDK if it hasn't been activated already. Let's add a helper method for that. Obviously, if the SDK is already active, we don't need to do anything. If it's not active, first we'll check that it's compatible with the Omid.js API version that we have added to the app. In this case, it was 1.1.1. If it's compatible, then we'll activate the session. All right, let's add a property add session for the add session. After we activated the SDK, we are ready to create the add session. We'll add another method for that. You can see it returns Omid add session, which is namespace, so it says Omid Pandora add session. First, we create an instance of Omid partner, which takes a unique name for a partner and the version of your app or SDK. Then we create add session context, which will be different for each placement. So we'll leave the implementation of this method to subclasses. And same for add session configuration. It'll be different depending on the add type. So that is something some classes will have to overwrite as well. So once we have configuration and the context, we are ready to create the add session. We'll just pass configuration and context as parameters. After that, we are ready to add the main view, the main add view to the add session. This view is what SDK will be looking at when it tracks changes in geometry. If we have any kind of, let's quickly pause here. If we have any UI elements that should not be considered abstractions, like in this case, we have a native close button that is part of Add UI. In this case, we can add it as a friendly abstraction. But let's play. So now we're done with creating the add session. Let's add an instance of add events, which is the object we'll be using to register impression. We'll take add session instance as a parameter. And after that, we'll add an additional method, which is called setup additional add events. This is for the video placement specifically, so that we can provide an instance of video add events. The default implementation will not do anything since only video placement needs that. And after that, we are ready to start measuring. So we'll call add session start. And after that, we'll register an impression with add events. Add events impression occurred. Now, when the add is dismissed, it's a good point for us to actually finish measurement. And basically, all we need to do is just call add session finish, and the session will be stopped. All right, that's I think that's it for the. All right, oh, one more thing. We'll add a property for Omid.js service, which returns the contents of the Omid.js service JavaScript file, which is omsdk.js. And after that, we are ready to move forward with the HTML display implementation. Again, we'll import the SDK. We already have most of the code implemented in the superclass. So as soon as we present the ad session creation will be started. So we just need to override these two methods for create ad session configuration. Let's pause here. So the ad session configuration for HTML display, in our case, will have a native impression owner. You have an option to, Shaylee, let's pause. Shaylee?
Yeah. Just
could you
pause
scroll back? Okay, could you scroll back a bit?
Okay, let me try that.
Possible.
Right here?
Yeah, right here. Thanks. So in our case, we have a native impression owner, but since it's a web view, we also have an option to go with the JavaScript owner. So it kind of depends on your implementation. This implementation uses native impression registration, meaning that the native code will trigger the impression event. And then video events owner is set to none because this is just a display ad. And then the third parameter is isolate verification scripts. It doesn't have a lot of meaning for this type of ad, so we'll just set it to false, which will instruct the SDK to not use the sandbox environment. And then create ad session will create a session context, will provide ad session context for the web view. The partner and the web view will be passed as parameters. And that should be enough to create the ad session. Let's play. All right. One more thing we need to do here. In case where Omid.js is not injected on the server side, we have to make sure it's injected locally. We'll use this utility method that is provided by Omid script injector. And the contents of Omid.js service will be injected in HTML after the HTML was downloaded or provided by ad response. This will make sure that measurement scripts can discover Omid API in the web view and can use it for measurements. One more thing we have to do here. Let's pause here. Thanks. By the original implementation of this was instructing the app to present the ad as soon as HTML creative was downloaded. And unfortunately, that's not enough to ensure that OM SDK will be operational. Because in our implementation, we are triggering the ad session as soon as the ad is displayed. So we actually have to wait for the web view to load DOM before it can accept events from the native side. So we'll change our implementation a little bit. Let's play. We'll move this present, Shaylee, let's play. We'll move this present add method somewhere else. So first we'll add a delegate method for WK web view navigation. Let's pause here. All right, so this is an equivalent of DOM content loaded event. You also have an option to register a JavaScript event handler, or if you're completely pre-rendering the ad, then you can listen to window on load event. And either one is fine, and then you can present the ad at this point. So the good thing about this implementation that it will align your impression registration with the begin to render event, which is what is recommended by MRC. So now we're let's play. We're ready to present the ad, and at this point we can be sure that Omid.js service is ready and we can fire impression. And another workaround that is currently required is when you destroy the ad, in order to ensure that session finish event has enough time to fire, we have to delay the destruction of the web view by a small amount of time. So in this case, we're using 1 second. We're keeping the web view around for 1 second after session finish event was fired. Now let's move on to video implementation. Let's pause here. So the video implementation, again, will use the base ad unit view controller as a superclass, which means that the ad session is almost ready to go. We just need to override 3 methods. The first one is create ad session context. Now, you can see that we are using hard-coded values here for URL to measurement script, the vendor key, and parameters. Let's play. But in a real-world scenario, you would get these values from the ad response, and most likely would be a vast document. So you can see that here in a comment, there's an example of how these values would be represented in a vast document. The vendor key is a dummy vendor. There's a JavaScript resource node with API framework Omid. This is the URL to measurement script. And then there's verification parameter string, which can contain any data. In our case, validation verification script expects it to be a URL, which it will use as a remote endpoint to dispatch events. But it's not limited to URL. It can be any string. So once we create an instance of verification script resource, we can proceed with creating the native ad session context. We'll take partner, Omid.js service, and resource array as parameters. And then we just need to create a native ad session configuration. And in this case, you can see that both parameters are set to native owner. We'll need a property for Omid video events. Let's override setup additional ad events to allocate the instance of Omid video events. And now we can use this variable to register video events. We'll start by registering loaded event. It takes vast properties as parameters, and in this case, it's an autoplay video with the autoplay and standalone parameters. Next, we'll do progress tracking events. The first one is start, which accepts video duration and player volume as parameters. We'll add additional method for player volume. The player volume should return 0 when the video is muted. Otherwise, it's just the volume of the player. Then the next events are just quartile events, and this is very similar to VAST. So if you already have VAST event tracking, this is where you would put OM SDK tracking as well. The third quartile, and then finally complete. We also have a play, resume, and pause events to react to user using the play pause button. Again, using Omid video events object to trigger resume and pause events. And then since our UI includes the mute and unmute button, we'll also want to do volume change event when this button is used. And then the last one is the click tracking, the ad user interaction with type click when the user clicks on the ad. That's pretty much it for video. Let's quickly cover native display. This is very similar to video, except you don't have to register any video events. Again, we create native ad session context, In this case, again, the values are hard-coded, but an example is given how these values could be represented in a OpenRTB response, for example. We create Omit verification script resource instance with these parameters, and then native add session context, partner, the contents of JS service script, the array of verification resources, and then we also need to create add session configuration with the native impression owner and non-owner for video events. And since the rest of the implementation is already covered by the superclass, we're pretty much done here. We just need to run this app and confirm that our implementation is operational. We'll use Charles for that. And like I said, Omit validation verification script will dispatch every event that it registers to this dummy domain URL. And you can see that, let's pause here. The first, what Omit validation verification script does is basically every event that is sent to it by the SDK is sent to a remote endpoint as a parameter in a query string, and it also sends additional message that shows that Omit is actually available, and this is what the first event was. Let's play. So other events here are just OM SDK events. The session start is the first one. Then we can explore the contents of the payload that the SDK sent the script, and see add session type is set to HTML. Then there's a Prussian event and a couple of geometry change events. You can also wiggle the view in the scroll view, and that will trigger more geometry change events. And then finally, we'll use the close button to dismiss the ad and confirm that session finish event fired along with other geometry change events. Now let's take a look at video. Again, you can see that the request is made to download the creative and the Omit validation script. The session start, the impression and geometry change events, the quartiles, pretty much everything is there. Let's confirm that pause button works and we are able to resume. And we'll try the mute unmute button. Take a look at the payload, video player volume set to 0 when it's muted. And then when we unmute, it's back to 1. And we'll use the click to check the click-through. And then finally dismiss the ad and confirm that session finish fired. So that's it for iOS implementation. Let's move on to Android.
Alex, I'm just doing a quick time check. We may have to move a little faster on the Android.
Okay. Let's try to do faster.
Starting now.
Right, so we have pretty much the same configuration here, 3 different fragments representing HTML, native display, native video placements. Let's start by adding SDK to the project. We already downloaded the resource from IAB portal, so let's just copy the entire OM SDK Android to the libs directory, and then change the Gradle settings to include it as a dependency. And then we'll add the JavaScript. Create the assets folder for Homage.js service. Put the contents of it. I copied the entire thing. The next, we'll add a utility class to help us load the contents of the Homage.js. And we'll return the contents. The method will return the contents as a string. After that, we are ready to start implementation for the display, HTML display integration. So the main class we'll be making changes to is the ad loader, which is responsible for downloading the HTML. What we'll need to make sure is that Omit is available in the HTML. So we'll use the script injector to include Omit in the HTML that we downloaded or received from ad response. After that, we'll add a utility class to help us set up the ad session. We'll start with HTML ad session. Again, just like iOS, the first thing we need to do is activate the SDK if it's not already activated. We'll check if it's active. If not, we'll try to activate it with the version of the JavaScript service. Then we'll create ad session configuration, again, using native impression owner, partner with the unique partner name, and the version of your bundle. Ad session context, which will accept the web view as a parameter. And then we're ready to return the ad session. Right, now back to display ad HTML fragment. We'll need an instance for the ad session. Now we'll try to find a perfect place for us to actually create ad session. And again, the important thing here is to not create the ad session too early. The on page finished is a perfect place for that. If on page finished it does not work for you, you can also use DOM-content-loaded JavaScript handler to start the session. After the session is created, we can add friendly abstractions, register the ad. In this case, we're registering the web view as the web view to track geometry changes. And then we start the session and register impression. And finally, when the view gets destroyed, we want to finish the session. That's it for HTML. Next, we'll do video. We'll go back to add session utility class and add a method for native ad session. It takes is display as parameter because the method works the same way for native and for display and video session with a slight difference. So isDisplay will help to tell us if we need native owner for video events. And then we'll create an instance of verification script resources. We'll need a helper method for that. And just like iOS, the values are hard-coded, but an example of add response is provided. So normally you will get, in your implementation, you'll probably get these values from VAST, and there could be more than one validation verification script. All right, so this one is ready to go. The next thing we'll need is the native ad session context. Takes partner, Amit.js, contents, and verification scripts list as parameters, and we are ready to create the ad session and return it. Now in the video ad native fragment, we'll need to find a good place for us to actually call that create ad session method, and then we'll need to create video ad events. So on create view looks like a good place for that. We create the ad session. We pass isDisplay false because this is a video. Then create video ad events and register ad view and start the session. After that, we call the loaded event with VAST properties. Again, this is a non-skippable autoplay standalone video. So that's what we're passing in VAST properties. And the last one here is the impression registration. Once that's done, we need to trigger to make sure all relevant video events are triggering. We already have progress tracking here. Start with a start event, pass in duration and volume as parameters, then add in first quartile, midpoint, third quartile. Let's see where we can put complete. On state ended handler is the perfect place for that. And since we're not fully prefetching the video, there may also be cases of buffering. So we'll also use buffer start and buffer finish events if the buffering prevented the user from seeing the playback. And then resume and pause events for when the play pause button was used. And then finally session finish when the view gets destroyed. And the last one here is the native ad, the native display ad. We just need the instance variable for the ad session. And again, on create view is the right place to create the session and start measurements. We'll pass display true, parameter, add friendly abstractions, and register native banner view with the ad session. And after that, we just need to start the session and trigger impression registration. And when the view gets destroyed, we'll finish the measurements. So that's it for the implementation. And if we still have time, we can do a quick demo.
Yeah, let's do a quick demo.
Yeah. So First, we'll need to make sure that the proxy is configured in the emulator. This way we can use Charles to track down every event that the validation verification script was sending. Right, now when that is ready to go, let's open Charles. And we'll start with video this time. You can see that the creative was requested and we're already firing events to the dummy domain. Let's confirm that Omid is supported, session started, expressions registered, and geometry change events are firing. The loaded event, start event. Let's see if play pause triggers resume and pause. That seems to be working fine. And then when the video finishes, the complete event was triggered. And now we're going to destroy the view. Geometry change and session finish.
Maybe Alex, we can stop here
Mm-hmm.
and move to the next section.
Sounds good. Thanks, Shelley.
Thank you very much, Alex, especially that you're on a different location altogether. So we'll make these videos available as part of the whole webinar being recorded. Plus, we'll make these demo videos available separately also for everyone to go over. Okay, the next section, we're going to go through how do you actually execute campaigns using OM SDK. And we have Sar from Double Verify to walk us through that. Sar?
Yeah, thanks you, Shaylee, and thanks, Alex, for the deep walkthrough. I learned a lot. So yeah, I'm happy to talk about campaign execution. Can you move a slide, please? Just starting off, suppliers in auction that have integrated OM SDK can now declare basically the Omid API. The Omid API is the JavaScript representation of the OM SDK and the future other extensions on the web. And really, it's the easiest, straightforward to know whether you're targeting viewability, measurable inventory. So good practice. This has been recommended already to be updated in OpenRTB 2.0 and up. If Omid is available in a given impression in the bid request, it would be included in the API framework table as ID 7. If the ad that on the response, if the Omid API is required, then it will also be declared with the Omid indication. Small note that there's some versions of OpenRTB that don't have ID 6, so we recommend skipping ID 6 altogether and just going to 7 when you're adding the Omid ID. Next slide, please. Yeah, so we're talking about a few execution paths here. kind of on the left side is publisher initiated, and the right side is advertiser initiated. There's kind of two typical integrations that could happen. The most popular, I believe, will be Ads SDKs, or what we call integration partner SDKs, kind of large entities that are embedded in many apps that would have Ads SDK, OM SDK within them, are responsible for injecting the measurement tag basically into the web view where the ad is executing, where they will be able to communicate with the Omid API. And the second scenario is, publishers that have their own ad server or their own ad delivery infrastructure or some sort of custom ad units would be responsible to inject the same tag into a web context or a JavaScript context. On the advertiser side, basically, if an Ads SDK is powering that app, and the publisher is kind of requiring or serving the ad, then they will include the tag themselves on the publisher ad server side, and the Ads SDK will deliver that. And lastly, if you're using a third-party ad server, kind of on the demand side, and display creatives, you can just include that in the JavaScript, in the HTML body, and include the measurement tag, and that would still be able to communicate with the Omid API, as it will be kind of executing within the web view that has the Omid API context. Next slide. So kind of digging a little bit deeper on more complicated scenarios, native display advertising generally, and maybe the first section is kind of global. There's three key parameters that OM SDK requires, and Omid API specifically requires to be able to execute a measurement provider, a vendor tag. These parameters are vendor key. That's a string that each vendor has. It's typically, and you can see this a little bit down here, it's typically the company domain -Omid. So that would be, doubleverify.com -Omid, or I'm not sure what's the other strings, but pretty much you should get them from your measurement provider. Verification resource URL is basically the base URL for the measurement tag, and verification parameters are basically set of IDs representing the advertiser, the campaign, and so on. So for native scenarios, these should kind of, depending on whether your integration is using the OpenRTB native ads 1.1 spec or the 1.2 spec. In the 1.1 spec, these could be passed through the JS tracker, basically as a kind of a single inline JavaScript. If you have kind of went on and you're on 1.2, then you can use event trackers, and that's the recommended approach in general. In 1.2, the JS tracker is being deprecated, and that's the JSON you can see on the left side in this slide. It will require basically two attributes, an event and methods, and we recommend ID 555 for those. Yeah, please, can you go to the next slide? Yeah. For VAST scenarios, so there's been a lot of debate over VAST 4.1 in the market. It's still kind of in not officially released. So to support adoption of OM SDK, we're recommending basically this two options. If you're already on VAST 4.1 or planning to adopt it, Within VAST, there will be like kind of first class node called Ad Verification, and it will be basically made up of kind of core pieces. Will be a verification node that would carry the vendor ID. Within it, it will hold the JavaScript resource, a potential tracking event for when this tag cannot be executed or failed to execute, and finally verification parameters. There could be multiple of these, so basically ad verifications will be a singular tag, but within it you may find multiple verification nodes, potentially based on kind of availability of vast wrappers. You may discover in the process of unwrapping, you would discover multiple of these, and all of them should be executed to perform measurement. On the right side is kind of like what we'd expect to see in market, I'd say for the near future, basically extensions to VAST 2.0, 3.0, and even 4.0. Same exact construct of VAST. The kind of the difference is really this sits as an extension. It's not a first class node, but it facilitates all the other parameters and attributes that I described before. Or really, the right side would be like quick path to execution. Last slide, kind of quick summary. On the left side, when you have a video web view, publishers, the measurement provider tag will be inserted into the web view through the partner SDK, through the integration partner SDK. In an advertiser scenario, this will come either through VAST 4.1 ad verification node or the extension in previous VAST versions. In native scenarios, a publisher that executes the native execution and wants to measure on their behalf can basically kind of directly inject those into a JS context that is provided via OM SDK. And in an advertiser scenario, these will be delivered kind of like what I described earlier via the JS tracker or the event tracker object. And with that, that's campaign execution.
Thank you, Sar, for those details. The next section is going to be about adoption. So we're going to cover three things: timeline, the guidance from MRC, the integration, validation, compliance, a little bit about that. So I'll start right away with the timeline. Brad, do you want to go ahead?
Thank you, Shelly. So to quickly recap, adoption of the OM SDK is voluntary. Though in adopting, participants do help streamline how measurement data is gathered while also reducing discrepancies in the process. Now, measurement providers, for their part, can go about getting the necessary inputs they need for their services more efficiently, which allows these providers to focus more intently on transforming measurement data to insight. With improved coverage rates on measurement, there is every reason to expect that we will see a virtuous effect on buyer confidence, which gives buyers the reassurance they need to transact on quality placements. And with buyers more confident to transact on quality inventory, the benefits are likely to flow to publishers and ultimately to users as well. Now, in terms of the timeline, we encourage implementing the OM SDK at the earliest opportunity, and we hope that this session has been helpful in showing you how to do that. For buyers and sellers looking to leverage viewable impression measurement in time for Q4, we suggest that these buyers and sellers require their partners to integrate OM SDK support by September 30th. Now, this will allow ample time for testing, iterating, and so on to be able to be fully live by the holidays without risk of impact by holiday code freezes and so on. So buyers and sellers who are ready sooner are, of course, encouraged to go live sooner. Remember ultimately that the timeline you follow is, of course, your own, although we are encouraging the ecosystem to adopt open measurement at earliest opportunity once again.
Thank you, Brad. MRC guidance. So we have Ron from MRC here to talk about that. Ron?
Shelly, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. So thanks. So this is Ron with the MRC. I've also got George Ivey with me. He'll correct me if I run astray or also help in answering questions at the end. But I just wanted to give a quick overview about how this intersects with the MRC audit and accreditation process. The first thing I wanted to say at the outset was that, as I believe Joe from IAS said at the beginning of this presentation, MRC has been a longtime supporter of this initiative, even of the idea of it. It's something that was discussed in 2016 when we were setting the mobile viewability guidelines, when there was this push and pull between whether there should be a mandated API signal or SDK. And we wrote the guidelines with both in mind. But as Joe pointed out and quoted, we highly encouraged an industry effort to have a single source SDK to make adoption easier for publishers and app developers. And we continue to see the very important need for this as we're doing mobile viewability audits, particularly with in-app, as we see lower measured rates because of slow SDK adoption, at least proprietary SDK adoption, where publishers and app developers are hesitant to adopt proprietary SDKs for fear that they'll have to do that multiple times. And this solves that. So MRC remains a very strong, staunch supporter of OM SDK. That said, we do anticipate that we'll have to conduct some procedures at the vendors in order to include use of OM SDK in the accredited viewability suite at vendors. The good news is, and there's several pieces of good news here, is we already have the requirements baked into the mobile viewability guidelines. As Joe mentioned, we thought about this a number of years ago that this would be an eventuality. So we do have what we would be expecting from an audit standpoint. It's going to vary depending on the vendor. So a number of presenters just went through different types of implementations of the OM SDK, different aspects within particular creatives, certain functionality that may be future state. So we do anticipate that there may be differential use of the OM SDK at vendors, whether they use it on a standalone basis or integrate it with other measurement. So depending on that, there may be some differences in what we need to do. But we have told all vendors that until we've actually looked at this, they should hold it out as unaccredited and unaudited until our auditors have gone in and done it. The basic premise of what we're looking for is really just that the vendors have processes to ensure that if they're ingesting and accepting OM SDK signals, that they have a process to say that they've done some additional or some initial onboarding to make sure that it's been implemented properly. We talked about things like versioning earlier. It's got the right version. The code is correct, etc. We are fully aware that the Tech Lab has a certification program, and we've had our auditors liaise with the IAB Tech Lab to ensure that they get comfort with that. So if a vendor is going to be reliant on the IAB Tech Lab certification before they onboard a publisher or an app, that we understand what that is, and that can obviate some of that testing. But then we're also going to need to ensure that there's periodic and ongoing checking, because there can be changes, there can be errors, there can be different versions. We want to make sure that the ingestion of that data goes through the audited systems that we've already put our hands on, and that there's no custom systems that we haven't previously audited. We want to make sure that the reporting is consistent, as well as the required application of IVT. And finally, we want to take a look at measured rate and coverage, because anybody that's gone through the MRC accreditation and audit process before knows that that's a key concern of viewability measurement. The good news is we've talked to our auditors and we said, well, how long do you anticipate this will take? The auditors have said it's about a week or two of effort. So we're not talking an elongated project. There does need to be some procedures that the auditors need to do at the vendors. But in the grand scheme of things, it's relatively brief and concise. What we would then do is, once the auditors have done that, and this could be done either as part of the ongoing required annual audits at the vendors, but if that's far out, that's not happening for some time, There is some one-off accelerated testing that the auditors can do to get this done sooner, so there doesn't have to be a disclaimer. And what we would essentially say is that once we've done that and there's been no issues and we're assured that there's a process in place and then it's being used as intended, that the vendor's viewability accreditation in-app would include use of the OM SDK, much like we've done with things like MRAID in the past where there's required QC. So that's the gist of what I wanted to cover. With that, I guess I'll hand it over to the next presenter.
Yeah. Thank you, Ron. Moving to the next is the roadmap, which will be covered by Michael from Oracle Mode. But just before that, I just wanted to say for 1 minute about the compliance. I didn't prepare a specific slide for that. This is a voluntary program offered by IAB Tech Lab. What we do is we take the integrated app and with your ads being served in it, and then we run it through our standard testing process. We've created about 90 plus tests to make sure that we are getting all the events and all your integration is properly working. And this certification ensures that your integration is going to work fine with all the vendor or measurement provider verification tags. So that's just a brief intro to that compliance. You can write to compliance@iabtechlab.com for more details. With that, I'll hand it over to Michael for the roadmap.
All right, thanks, Shelly. So the question of what comes next. One of the topics that is, I would say, at the forefront is the question of where is the Open Measurement SDK supported? Starting out, we are just looking at iOS and Android apps. Moving into Q2, one of the primary concerns is getting both desktop and mobile web support up and running. And then in future quarters, addressing additional environments such as Windows apps, OTT or set-top devices, and anything else that may crop up in the future. And hard timelines and detailed support are, of course, TBD on that. But one thing that we do have, or we should have some additional information on coming up in Q2, is some of the technical changes expected in the near future. And Shelly, if you could move to the next slide. So breaking this down into just a quick sneak peek on some of these. And again, the final prioritization list here is still to be confirmed, but some of the things that have already been proposed are, from the invalid traffic perspective, both general and sophisticated invalid traffic support. Now, both GIVT and SIVT via existing vendor methods should already be available, but the dev note here is in particular for any app-specific signals that could allow vendors to track additional SIVT methodologies that might not be available without those signals from the Open Measurement SDK. From a performance perspective, performance is always a critical question, but it's particularly important here just because any introduced latency as a result of adding the Open Measurement SDK that might impact key attention metrics from the served ad is something that we want to minimize to the greatest degree possible. In addition to standard internal refactors for just maintainability of the code base and continued improvements and rollouts in the future. Viewability being the core feature here, there are a few additional items of support coming into that, whether that be better debugging and more detailed reporting for reasons why an ad might not be viewable, support for the MRC audibility standard, providing measurement signals directly to the publisher client without needing to go through a verification vendor script, and continuous view time directly via the Open Measurement, via OMIT. As far as encryption and security, that's one where I think one of the critical features is going to be kind of a handshake or safety verification, just to make sure that any vendor scripts running can say, yes, this is coming from an actual OMIT integration. It's legitimate, it's unspoofed, essentially saying that we don't think this is being hijacked and coming from just kind of any arbitrary signal. In addition to that, looking into expanding safeguards against any API abuse to generate errant data, whether that's via accidental or intentional publisher integration. And as well, having a full stack automated testing suite for all of the different components, native, JS client, just to confirm functionality and ensure trust in the validity of the OM SDK signals as future versions are launched, and to make sure that there are no errors in regression testing. Brand safety is one where kind of the question at the forefront of a lot of minds is blocking and VPAID support, which in the initial version is not going to be fully supported, but both server-side blocking and verification vendor script blocking are expected to be worked out to some degree. In addition, providing an app category signal to the verification scripts for app section whitelisting or blacklisting is part of the proposal there. On the audience and reach perspective, I think that the main point there is just making sure device ID, user ID is available for audience and reach reporting per compliance with GDPR. And then various and sundry other features, whether that's some of the OpenRTB bitstream support for OMID capability, just to help the transition from VPAID to OMID, or for better native ad support, defining a standard field in the RTB responses for the vendor key and verification parameters, just for easier programmatic injection of the verification scripts, and a proposal to write out a Swift version of the iOS SDK for better performance and easier adoption for apps coded in Swift. And this is far from an exhaustive list, but kind of the current state of the extant proposals. And I think that kind of wraps it up. So back to you, Shaylee, for last thoughts.
Thank you, Michael. Yeah, that sort of concludes the webinar today. You can find more information at iabtechlab.com/OMSDK. That's the page that we'll keep updating all the information, any future announcements, everything is available on this page. I think for support, there is a support URL, OMSDK support at iabtechlab.com. If you're integrating and encountering any issues, feel free to send an email to that. That's the main mechanism we have set up for now. And as we scale up, we're looking at adding like an FAQ page, also starting a generic Google group or a forum page to ask questions. For now, those members who are part of the working group have access to a Slack channel. So this working group is slightly different than other working groups. It requires a specific participation agreement, which is designed to ensure protection of IP that is being contributed by all the commit group members. And to those who sign up for that agreement and be part of the working group, we do provide access to the source code. There is a very active, vibrant Slack channel for discussions that's available. But we will also try to make a kind of forum available for those who are not part of the working group separately as we scale up. So with that, we have only 2 minutes left. We are slightly running over time, but I know there were a few questions. So Meena, maybe we have time for like 3 or 4 questions.
Sure. So the first question is, when is VPAID support expected to be included?
So regarding VPAID, so OM SDK as such is not planning to support VPAID injection or measurement through VPAID methods. We are aligning towards the VAST ad verifications node. That's how the OM SDK is designed, and probably the first channel through which the ad verifications node and VAST can be used. And right now it's only in-app, so whereas the VPAID support anyway is very, very limited on in-app environments. When we go to web and VAST 4.1 that is scheduled to be released in Q2, we will have more updates on how you manage when the two type of methods are coexisting. Like the VPAID will be there in some environments, and then OMSDK will be there in some environments as it ramps up. So that guidance will be provided with the 4.1 release. So please look out for that later in Q2. We'll have more guidance on how to manage with coexisting standards.
Is there a cost to test and use the SDK with the Tech Lab as part of the instructions to onboard?
There's no cost to download or test the SDK. It's provided completely free through the portal. The if you opt for the compliance certification service, it's a paid service, as I mentioned earlier. So there is definitely a cost to that for Tech Lab members, and there's a different price for those who are not Tech Lab members. Next.
How do we get the partner name assigned to us?
So the partner name is the namespace name that you get from the portal. That's your partner name.
How often will we need to update the SDK as an app developer, and will this require app submissions? Are there drawbacks to not updating the SDK?
So the SDK, like I said, we are releasing every 2 weeks. We are following the semantic version of a major release, minor release, fixes. All the releases within a major release we're going to ensure that they are backward compatible. But the major release, when you change from 1.x to 2.x, may contain breaking changes. And then when you get the release, there's a change log that identifies the fixes or the changes that have been made. And whenever there are going to be any significant changes of features or functionality, we will make sure that we market and publicize that properly to everyone. So that's a decision that you can make based on your product life cycles as to when to upgrade. And when we think that there are significant functionality changes that we want people to upgrade to, we will definitely publicize that.
Can you explain how the lack of support of vPaid will affect in-app viewability measurement?
Like I said, that this OM SDK is designed to measure viewability on its own. It doesn't need vPaid. So once you have OM SDK integrated, there's no need for vPaid to be used.
Do we have time for more?
Yeah, we can go to one or two more.
Are there any future plans in the namespace portal to create a customized namespace?
Not right now, but we'll put that in our backlog for prioritization.
How would the namespace framework work in Objective-C integrations?
That's a little more technical than I can get. Alex, do you want to take that if you're still online?
Sure. Yeah, in addition to namespace in the module and the framework itself, we also namespaced every class. So there is no risk in loading two SDKs side by side as long as they have different namespace.
Just one more.
Sorry. Is the add session error event also mandatory to fire, as it was not covered in the demo video?
Alex, I think that would be, again.
Could you repeat that?
The add session error event, is it mandatory to fire, as it was not covered in the demo video?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the demo video did not cover everything, unfortunately, but there is documentation that covers more events. General recommendation is that if you can identify a relevant event programmatically, you should definitely fire it, and that goes for error event as well.
Any more, Shirley?
I think, yeah, we can make it a good 5 minutes over, so maybe one more question.
Sure. Why would you recommend an extension resident implementation of verification in VAST 4.0 when it already includes the add verifications node?
So 4.1, 4.0, in 4.1 there, I think there is an addition of something called verification parameters that wasn't present in 4.0. That's why we are putting 4.0 together with 2 and 3. So to differentiate it from 4.1.
In the display third-party advertiser initiated scenario, how does the measurement vendor tag need to be configured within the HTML?
Sar, do you want to take that?
Yeah, it just needs to be included as a strict reference to the tag. So it's basically a JavaScript tag.
Our applications already include many SDKs, including Google's IMA, Moat, ComScore, etc. Is this OM SDK yet another SDK we have to integrate, or does IMA, Moat SDKs already support OM?
So that's so if you're an app and you already you use other SDKs for your monetization purposes for serving and rendering your ads, then you don't need to integrate OM SDK separately. You would get it through Google's IMA or GMA SDK or any other provider like InMobi or AdColony or Tapjoy that you're using. But if you are a publisher that is serving and rendering your own ad, like you have your own mechanisms to do that, then you would need to integrate the OM SDK. That's the key differentiation.
It's also worth noting that as verification vendors, we've all basically agreed to deprecate our own proprietary SDKs in favor of Open Measurement. So even if you've got, say, like the IAS SDK that's integrated, we'll be transitioning everyone over to Open Measurement as opposed to the IAS SDK. So basically, new features will not be rolled out on proprietary SDKs, and we hope to have everyone transition over to just the single Open Measurement SDK.
Thanks, Jeff. I think, Meena, that's about it. We're 5-6 minutes over. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Once again, I'll repeat the iabtechlab.com/omsdk. That's the page to get all the information. We will post the webinar recordings as well as the recordings of the demos that Alex showed on the website. And any questions that were not answered, we'll prepare an FAQ with those questions and post those too. So if your question was not answered today, then you will still have the answer later on when we post the webinar archives. Thank you, everyone, for joining. And thanks to all the speakers for a fantastic webinar. Bye.
Thank you.